I Hate Politics is a podcast about a human activity we love to hate. And this is the I Hate Politics candidate interviews with Mark Pierzchala and Monique Ashton for Rockville Mayor. I'm Sunil Dasgupta, host of I Hate Politics. If you're new to the show, I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools, and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse, democratic, and sometimes divided societies. As part of the show, we have conversations with local, state, and sometimes federal candidates, rather than ask how they stand on a multitude of issues. These conversations go in depth on a few issues. This week is a doubleheader. 2 episodes looking at the City of Rockville Mayor and Council elections. This episode you're listening to now includes the 2 mayoral candidates for Rockville, Monique Ashton and Mark Pierzchala. The accompanying episode features 5 city council candidates. Rockville City elections are November 7th. Mail-in ballots are out. Music for this episode comes from 2 debut piano compositions from my friend and Kensington resident Adam Barbaro. Rhododendron Number 1 and Question Answered. If you are a professional musician or one on the side, or know someone else who is and wants to share their music on the show, please email us at producer@ihppod.org. I'll be back with Mark Pierzchala and then Monique Ashton, who are both running to be mayor of the city of Rockville. Mark Pierzchala has been a Rockville City Council member for 12 years, during which time he has been one of the city's most prominent advocates for housing density. He is a statistician in his private life and can be seen riding his bike all over the city of Rockville. You can find more about him at mark4rockville.org. markforrockville.org. Mark Pierzchala, welcome to I Hate Politics.
Thank you, Sunil, and I'm very happy to be here.
You're running to be mayor of the city of Rockville, and you've wanted to talk about housing. Can you describe what the problem of housing is in the city that you seek to represent?
Right. Okay. So it's a regional, even national issue, but the city has a lot to do with it. I personally know several boards and commission members from Rockville in their 30s who had to move out of the city because when it came time for them to buy a house, they couldn't afford it. I know my mother just moved into town center in December, and her rent for a 1-bedroom, 1-den is $23.91 plus utilities. So I think there is a vast mismatch between housing supply and housing demand, and supply is not keeping up with the demand.
Are there particular manifestations of that in the city of Rockville, or is it just the general regional problem and Rockville simply a part of it?
In Rockville, the biggest barrier has been the adequate public facilities ordinance, school capacity issues, that kind of thing. And often we've seen big protests against a new development.
What is the Rockville Adequate Public Facilities Ordinance? Can you explain that?
Yes. So this is an ordinance that says in order to develop, especially residential housing, there must be adequate water and sewer. There must be certain constraints on school capacity, and there's also some traffic constraints. So the APFO has stopped projects in Rockville before. The particular parameters put in place, called the Adequate Public Facility Standards, they're there, and they can be changed at any time. The uncertainty comes in because you have decisions made at the county level that then impact the city. So decisions can be anything, for example, from delaying the construction of a high school by a year or two. It can be, not having enough money to do the construction you want. It could be the county not wanting to realign cluster boundaries, because there's a lot of extra capacity in the county, but parents are very reluctant to realign those cluster boundaries. So they moved into place. They want their kid to go to those schools. That's what they counted on. The developer does not necessarily want to take on that uncertainty where they can be stopped mid-process. And so therefore it is a problem. For me, the Adequate Public Facilities Ordinance, if you have one, shouldn't be one blanket solution for the whole city. I would like to liberate it somewhat along transit corridors and around transit centers, and then keep it in place for the rest of the city. I'm perfectly fine with that, because I want to concentrate housing around transit centers and up and down transit corridors. I think that's where it needs to be.
We need the APFO to change. What else would you like to see change?
Okay, so the time it takes to go through the approval process is far too long. The time it takes to get all the permits, whatever. I just attended the Chamber of Commerce real estate panel a few mornings ago, and they're very clear that whereas they love working with the City of Rockville staff, the processes themselves to get approvals and to get the permits, to get their site plans approved, they're all way too long-winded, and it slows and delays their getting that shovel in the ground, and this is an additional cost that doesn't need to be there. We can still protect our residents' interests by being more streamlined.
What is the average length of the process now, and what would you like it to be? How would you achieve that?
Right. So all right. So we had an example again, Twinbrook Quarter. They first purchased the property in 2011. They will deliver their first tenants in 2024. So you're talking 13 years for them to go through a process. They got their approvals from mayor and council in 2019. But that was a project approval. Then they have to go through the site plan for each phase of their project. We were told, for example, that the one thing still not in place for their first building is the MPDU agreement with the city. MPDU meaning moderately priced dwelling unit. And that has yet to be approved. Apparently it's gone through 3 iterations already, and that was definitely cited as a unnecessary delay.
How can you shorten the time from 2011 to 2019? That's not under your control. What is it that you do?
It is partly under our control. The time frames it takes to get, from mayor and council to planning commission, back to mayor and council to approval, that can be very long-winded, and it can be subject to iteration, that kind of thing.
Is this a matter of not having enough staff?
The planning department does need more staff, in my opinion, yes. But I think the actual processes that we put people through also could be streamlined.
Let's talk about the MPDU specifically. What is the problem? Why is there 3 iterations of MPDU's agreement?
So whenever you have a big project like this, the city will entering into an NPDU agreement, moderately priced dwelling unit agreement for Twin Brook Quarter is 15% of units. There's 1,865 units planned for that site, the whole project, of which 15% will be MPBDUs. I think that's approximately 280 units. Okay, but the city will prescribe or come to an agreement with the developer about income ranges for those MPDU units. Other things about where they'll be located, for example. We know they have to be dispersed throughout the project. So there's a lot of those kind of parameters, and that apparently has taken some time.
Where are you getting stuck?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a staff issue, but I don't think it's a dispersion problem. It's probably more about which number of units in which income band will be created. I think that would be my guess.
It is a staff problem, right? But how closely does the mayor and the council follow this so that, if necessary, they can make a political judgment rather than just leave it to staff?
Right. So we have changed our MPDU regulations several times in the past 12 years. They're continually changing. We leave it up to staff then to implement it. I only found out about this issue 2 days ago. Okay, so I haven't had a chance to really follow it up. I'll mention it to staff through an email.
You are wanting greater density of housing in the city of Rockville. But if you look at Montgomery County as a whole, the incorporated areas of Montgomery County, all of them have lower density than the unincorporated areas adjacent to it. So Silver Spring has greater density than Tacoma Park. Rockville has lower density than Aspen Hill. Incorporation in some ways is used to keep density low. And that's both cultural and it's political power. How do you address that?
There's that cultural history, and we have, for example, large swaths of land that are either zoned for single family or for townhomes. The cultural patterns in the 1960s, 1950s were all about homes are here and stores are there and offices are somewhere else. And that's just baked into what we are. And even if we were to change our regulations tomorrow dramatically, we still have that baked in. The street patterns, the housing patterns are there. So I am not suggesting Rockville entirely should be higher density, not at all. I think it should be higher density, and we should be more willing to allow it around transit centers and up and down transit corridors. That's where I want the higher densities. And the reason I want them there is that gets people out of their cars. To me, that's a big deal.
Rockville Town Center is close to Metro, but has had great difficulty in being a viable location for the mixed-use kinds of development I think you are wanting. Meanwhile, across from 355 on the east side of the metro station, everything is still low-rise. And I know that there is a plan to develop it, but there doesn't seem to be anything sort of large like Twin Brook Quarter project coming up. So there seems to be some mismatch between wanting the housing that you do and the reality of getting it. Do you see that, and how do you see it?
Right. Well, yes, of course I see it. But let's not forget that it wasn't too long ago that Town Square went in, and there have been 2 buildings right to the immediate south of Town Square that have gone in, the Boulevard 44, which, full disclosure, my mother now lives in, and Boulevard Ansel across the street from that. So it's not that there hasn't been housing coming in to town center. What we have seen with the Urban Land Institute report is there's a mismatch between the retail space and the number of residents. The town square itself was badly designed. It's totally shut off from 355. You don't know it's there as you drive by. Its density was shortened. And so you don't really have the density you need in town center. On the other hand, you have plots of land that could go, tomorrow to apartment buildings. There's a piece of land right next to the Choice Hotels building that we have allowed to go either office or apartment. But yet they could go through the process starting tomorrow to do their apartment building if they chose to do it. But they apparently can't pencil it out at the moment.
Why not? There is zoning capacity, but those projects are not coming. What seems to be the problem?
All right. So, again, from the real estate panel a few mornings ago, we learned that if there's a crane that you see constructing a building right now, it's because they got their financing before interest rates went up. The other thing is the rent guidelines or even the rent laws that have been passed in the county recently. They don't apply in Rockville, and I hope they never do. But that has scared off also development countywide.
We were not building even before interest rates went up. In fact, even when interest rates were rock bottom, we were not building at breakneck speed. It's not that there was building activity prior to the rent stabilization law. So, these factors that are said to be impactful, seem like a blip in a longer trend line.
Since 2009 to the present time, we have 3,575 units that have come online over approximately 10 or 12 buildings. I'll say 1,151 of those were not unanimous approvals. They were controversial. That's not including approvals that were made where the building has not yet been done. It does not include Turnbrook Metro or Turnbrook Quarter, which is coming online, their first project. So there's actually been more approvals than that. They haven't been built either because they're still getting their act together or they're just on delay for whatever reason. I also say, in addition to interest rates, it's things like construction costs and supply chain issues, which still persist today. Those are other things. So I have to push back that there hasn't been building. I think what's more important is there enough building, and what kind of grief do we put on the developers when they want to build?
I'm sure there is development all the time. Do you think 3,575 units over the period of time that you're talking about, now a decade and a half, is success?
It is at least a partial success, yes. I mean, you have 3,575 families, whether that's one person or parents with children, have a home.
How does it compare with other jurisdictions, maybe even the county, or other Gaithersburg?
A comparison with Gaithersburg is very interesting because I think Gaithersburg does a much better job of saying, yes, we want this development. And, used to be Gaithersburg and Rockville were neck and neck for being the second largest city in Maryland. Now Gaithersburg has outstripped us. Is that a metric I care about greatly? No, I care about greatly housing prices and what the apartment buildings can get and what people are forced to pay. That's the metric. And, that's too high. It's too high all over the place. So it's not just a Rockville supply and demand issue. It's a regional supply and demand issue. But what I am saying is Rockville, in my opinion, should make it easier and grab a greater share of these people who need a place to live. And by the way, we have, in my opinion, a lot of space that could potentially be converted to residential up and down Rockville Pike, close to either Rockville Metro or Turnbrook Metro. And a lot of what I would call archaic uses of land, low-level low-level shopping centers, for example, that kind of thing could eventually be converted into housing.
At some point, just a little bit ago, you said that builders were not building for whatever reason. We talked about interest rates, we talked about housing, construction costs, we talked, about sort of things that are in the marketplace, in the development marketplace, that have to be dealt with. Do you have any analysis of why Gaithersburg may do it better than Rockville, such that Gaithersburg seems to be, in your mind at least, more successful in getting projects?
I would say they're more successful because they're politically more accommodating. Okay. Now, one thing I have not been able to get my hands on, and if I'm elected mayor, I will certainly be willing to fund and get people in front of us who can explain housing production and what it takes to get a housing project going. But what are the real bottlenecks?
All the things that we impose, whether it's impact taxes or the MPDUs, are all taxes that on real estate development. So when you ask for MPDUs at 15%, right, the developer is simply shifting the cost to the market rate units, right? And so you're making some units more expensive at the cost of making some units, cheaper.
Okay, some of these are county impositions; they're just there. We in the city, what we impose is process and delay.
All right, let's talk about the politics of housing in Rockville, right? The issues are what they are, the constraints, you've described them. Do you think the people of Rockville, do you think other political leaders in the city are also aligned with your views on this?
So I've publicly said we need thousands and thousands of more units, that the adequate public facilities ordinance is actually counterproductive. Rockville should be its own master when it comes to land use, not subject to decisions by funding at the county council or cluster boundaries from the Board of Education. And what I come back to is, when your child who's a fifth grader is coming into society as a young adult, if their housing costs are too high, they're under a lifelong financial burden that my generation didn't have. And that's what I'm trying to get across, that you have to look at the future of your children as well as the present. And that's been a very, very difficult position to take.
Mark Pierzchala, good luck in the campaign.
Sunil, thank you for this. You're a very tough interviewer. I really enjoy that, and you don't allow easy answers to go unquestioned. I appreciate that very much. So it's been enjoyable.
That was Mark Pierzchala for Rockville Mayor. You can find out more about him at mark4rockville.org. I'll be back with Monique Ashton. Monique Ashton has been Rockville City Council member since 2019 and is the president of the Maryland Municipal League, an association of city governments in the state. She is a healthcare communications executive and has been a PTA leader. You can find more about her at moniqueashton.com. Monique Ashton, welcome to I Hate Politics.
Hello, how are you? Thank you for having me here.
What do you think is the most important issue in the upcoming Rockville elections for which you are running to be mayor?
Thank you. I think there's a lot that we have to focus on in our city, from the economy to public safety. I will say in our last City of Rockville budget survey, public safety came up pretty high, and so I'd love to explore more about that with you.
Can you describe the problem of public safety in Rockville from your point of view? What is it?
Well, I will say that, first of all, Rockville has been awarded the 12th safest suburb by a number of sources. And so I'll say, generally speaking, we are very safe. However, we have seen some changes that really had an impact, especially post-COVID and inflation, where we see that there's some pressure points in our community that are causing some changes, right? We're seeing some changes in juveniles getting more involved. We're seeing issues of shoplifting. We're seeing some organization of people who try to just open car doors. But I'll say overall, we are very safe comparably across the county, the region, and the nation. However, we know that for our residents, safety is an important part of quality of life, and we're continuing to get better.
In addressing the perception of safety, sometimes you can make things worse. So in addressing perception versus addressing reality, how do you find the balance?
So I think that, I agree that Rockville, we are very fortunate to be one of the safest cities in America, but I do think that when someone, even part of perception, people have Ring cameras, they see people rifling through neighborhoods and trying to open cars, that makes people feel vulnerable, right? And so when we see people who are, and this is not just to Rockville, it's the county, it's the nation, where there's increases in shoplifting that's happening, that's impacting small businesses. It's also impacting people who feel unsafe when they see these things happening in some of our local stores. So they're not, I would say, large crimes against society. I think we actually had a 20% drop in crimes against society.
That's exactly the problem, right? You have a drop in crime and a heightened perception of safety, and those things don't match. How do you even deal with that?
Yeah, so I will say that where we did see an increase was crimes against property. And when that happens, people feel vulnerable. And for example, I have a neighbor who, her car, unfortunately left her keys in her cars, and that car was taken, right? Now, we can do all the things about lock your doors and lock your cars, but at the same time, you don't expect anyone to be going through your neighborhood trying to open your car doors.
What is the increase that you're actually seeing? You said property crimes. What kind of property crimes? Is it mainly in cars and being mainly caught on Ring cameras? What is the increase? Because overall, there is a decrease.
So crimes against society, that's a decrease in 20%. We've had a 16% increase in crimes against property. Like you said, it's the someone trying to break into a car, steal a car, identity theft, that has been something particularly with our seniors, has been an area of concern for us. It's shoplifting in stores. Those are all what you consider crimes against property.
Are there particular locations that are, where these crimes against property are clustered?
It has been across the city. It's not like they're targeting any one particular neighborhood. I've seen it in King Farm. I've seen it in Twin Brook. It's been in West End. It's been in 270 West. So it has been in different parts of our community. And we take it seriously. We want to make sure that our folks feel safe, that their property is safe. And again, as we are a relatively safe city, we're still going to work to improve.
Juveniles are primary perpetrators of these kinds of property crimes?
I won't say primary. I will say there's an increase from what we've seen in the past. When you look, generally speaking, at arrests, you see it clustered in the 12 to 17, 12, and then 18 to 23 after that, and 24 to 29. You do see it there. You see it less among seniors and the 40 and above, right? Right. But I think there are a number of issues at hand. I was meeting with our chief in the previous week, and some things we're learning is that sometimes adults are using children for crime because there's less penalty for children. And I think it's very unfortunate when adults do that. It's not the first time I've seen that happen. It's happened in other jurisdictions.
What is the racial breakdown of the arrests, especially among juveniles?
The biggest difference is in gender. More males than females. And then you'll also see, for example, if you look at not just saying juveniles, but all, there were 101 arrests for Black and African Americans last year, and then white, and unfortunately they put white Hispanic, but white Hispanic was 63, white only was 49. And then you have Black Hispanic was 2 and Asian was 5. So that was a capture of one particular year.
Okay, so it's about 45% then.
Correct.
That's disproportionate.
That is unfortunately, I will say I agree. There's a lot of disparities, whether you look at earned income, arrest. And I want to be very, very clear to anyone who's listening that there is nothing inherently tied to a particular race or population. It's usually what are the conditions and circumstances people are in.
What is within the capacity of the city of Rockville to change the root causes as you were just describing?
One, in terms of safety, we are doing things like making sure we're properly staffed, incentivizing officers to, be a part of our police department. We're also looking at how do our officers engage with the community and doing fair and impartial policing, and that we're developing relationships with the community. The police chief will say arresting people is a very small part of the job. It's helping people every day. That's a big part of the job. But we do have to have officers that are out there being available, both on the enforcement side, but also on the how do we help solve issues side. The other aspect for me is mitigation and prevention, right? And so one of the things we've done for me is I looked at some of our youth programming, teen and youth summer as well as year-long opportunities, and I found that we were getting waitlisted 12 minutes after some of those programs were opening. And I felt like we needed to do more for our young people to give them good alternatives and things to do. And so we expanded some of those programs over this last year. We also looked at increasing a staff person to be able to support those programs. So I look at that on the mitigation and prevention side, right? Alternate activity. The other thing we're doing is we've done mitigation efforts. Like I initiated an effort to do a gun buyback program. We did see an increase in ghost guns on our streets as well as in the county. I know that it's outside of the city, but everyone remembers the Magruder incident that happened. And then we've all heard that ghost guns, people have been buying them off of the internet without any background checks, and they don't have serial numbers, so it's just a challenge. So we did a gun buyback program in the city. We collected about 600 ghost guns, assault rifles, and other kind of guns that are now no longer in our city, and we melted them, sent them to the incinerator. So those are a range of things that we've been doing. We've also been doing some things within our police department so that people don't only engage with them on their worst day.
You said that you did some teen and youth programming increases. Now, most juvenile crime that happens late at night, and during a time when we really cannot have any teen or youth programming available, right? It's often after 11 p.m. It's often, sometimes early morning. How does teen and youth programming then help with that part? Because that's when most of these property crimes, the car and the rifling and the, ring captures that is happening.
We've actually seen people do things with packages during the day. Summertime tends to be, when there's unsupervised, lack of supervision because people have to work. So I would say that that's how the summer programs and some of our programs help after school. We have seen shoplifting happening daytime as well, after school.
How long do your programs go?
So we actually have programs during the summertime. We also have programs throughout the year. So it's not just,
How late do they go in the day?
So some of our programs we have, it varies. I think sometimes they can be 6:30. We've had also some trips we've taken for nighttime. So it really varies.
Does the city of Rockville provide SROs, school resource officers, now called community engagement officers?
So the city of Rockville does. And we have Officer Derek Tibbs, who, is a connecting point. So, for example, when there was the issue with, I'm sure you may have heard it, but there was a school where there were fentanyl pills, or perceived to be fentanyl pills that were found by a child on a school playground, and they were ingested and the kids got sick. It was Officer Tibbs who was one of the first ones out there to help.
What school is Officer Tibbs at?
So he goes to multiple schools. He's not just at one school all day.
Yeah. So is that in the RM cluster? Is it in the Rockville cluster? Where?
He has gone to Rockville High School. He has gone to the RM cluster. So he kind of is a resource for us across our cluster of schools.
And that's so the department has one officer dedicated to this kind of job.
That's right.
So there was a bomb threat at Rockville High School today.
That's right.
And did the city police department respond to that, or did the county respond to that?
Our city police department did respond, and I will say there are times, depending on the level of an issue, you'll have both the city and the county will come out. But because the city's here, for the incident that I saw yesterday, they were able to get there first. But I do want to note, just to clarify, on the Rockville High School, they did do a sweep. They found it was not a credible threat.
Because you said that there's 16% increase in property crimes. So what has been the reallocation of police officers to preventing property crime?
So what they will do is look at where the number of patrols they have in a particular community and trying to send out officers there to be available. One example is we had the shoplifting in town center, right? An officer will sometimes park in the area, so there's a visual presence of an officer there. The officer will patrol and drive around the area. And we also have seen sometimes, some folks using off-duty police officers as additional security when needed. But generally speaking, they will increase their presence at that area and make sure that they're visible, as well as sometimes, just being very watchful and mindful, so that if there's an anticipated pop or we've seen some trend data, they'll put some additional officers to make sure that we're supporting. And I will also note right now, another very real issue is, again, we're relatively safe, but we always want to think ahead with everything that's going on globally. We are seeing some bias incidents, and so our police officers have been patrolling some nonprofit and faith-based institutions, just because we know sometimes when there are global crises, things happen locally, and we wanted to make sure that all those places feel supported and secure as well.
So you did say that sometimes store managers or property owners are getting off-duty police officers. Let's talk about staffing in Rockville Police Department. How short are they? I mean, most police departments are short. What is the shortages in Rockville?
So I will say we've made a lot of progress here in the past. At the height of where we needed support, there were 15 vacancies. We are down to 4. So that was a lot of intentional work doing meet and greets in communities, at community rec centers, and getting folks to consider going into policing.
There were 15 vacancies, 4 remain, so there were 11 people hired. Do you know what number of these 11 people actually live in the city?
That's really good information. I don't have that handy now, but I will say that we do have officers that live in the city. We do have officers that have to drive out of the city. One of the things that we did in the last budget cycle is we created an employee home ownership program so that they could get a no interest down payment loan up to a particular amount. And there were going to be 5 of those for police and 5 for other city employees.
So one is the affordability issue for the police officers, but also how police recruitment works. If of the 11, a significant number live outside, not just the city of Rockville, perhaps outside the county, which is, I think, fairly common, then recruitment within the city of Rockville is not very successful.
By the numbers, we've seen a lot of success in being able to attract people. I think part of that is just creating a good work culture, being an elected body that appreciates and values the work that they do.
You get $8 million, you said, from the county in lieu of service provided. How do you measure that $8 million? How do you know it's not more or less?
So what we did, and I wouldn't say it's in lieu, but it's because of the shared service. They're honoring, if they had to hire more people to do the work that we are doing, that we have been doing for years and years, what would that cost the county? And they look at the formula of calls for service. They look at the formula of how many officers we have and what would it take for the county to duplicate that and to provide that.
How much do you expect this $8 million to go up now?
That is a discussion that we're having in negotiation because of their specialized need for additional support from the city of Rockville.
What did you ask?
Well, I will say it's to cover some of the overtime that we are experiencing now. So if we went from 70% calls for service to 84, that's a 20% increase, right? That we have to make sure that we're covering with overtime. But longer term, I anticipate, at least for the first year, that we'll probably need 4 more officers.
Okay.
At least, and then we'll visit to see if there'll be additional, maybe 4 more the following year.
What does an officer cost Rockville?
It's somewhere along the lines of $100,000 to $120,000. It depends on the level of officer, obviously. But you have to think about the officer, and then beyond that, also the equipment, the take-home car, all that.
Now, Rockville City Police Department doesn't investigate major crimes. Will that sharing of the responsibilities remain?
The county still plays a vital role in our city for major crimes and will continue to for the foreseeable future.
Does the level of service sharing of responsibility include major crimes or not include major crimes?
So the county will still continue to do that level of investigation. Officers do help, but I anticipate a continued collaboration with the county on that.
Do you expect the public safety budget in the city of Rockville to go up significantly in the next few years?
I anticipate if the county is asking our city to cover more of the calls for service, that we will need to look at increasing our budget to have those officers, at least to the tune of potential 4 officers.
Your expectation is that the county will meet the extra cost of the 4 officers, and it won't come out of the city budget itself. Is that correct?
Well, I've been successful in negotiating a big deal in the past, and I think they realize the situation that we're in, and I think that we have a good relationship with the county, especially after, some of the work we've done together on COVID and this big solving of the tax duplication work. I know that there's actually meetings happening today on that front. So I do feel that they will have the capacity, right? Because they have vacancies. And so there's some unspent personnel that they can help us support the needs that they have, to support our officers so that it's not impacting our city budget.
Monique, Ashton, thank you for taking the time. Good luck in the campaign.
Thank you. I really appreciate all you do. And I appreciate the name. I hate politics too, but I like getting the work done for our community. So thank you, Sunil. It's great to chat with you.
That was Monique Ashton for Rockville Mayor. You can find more about her at moniqueashton.com. That's all for this episode of I Hate Politics, where we aim to stem the decline in local news by working with community voices. I Hate Politics is produced by me, Sunil Dasgupta, and assistant producer Daniel Galileo, with support from University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I direct UMBC's political science program at the universities at Shady Grove in Montgomery County, where, among other things, we explore and learn about politics, government, and society close to home. Music for this episode are two short piano compositions by Kensington resident Adam Barbaro. If you know anyone who wants to feature their music on the show, please email us at producer@ihppod.org. Rockville elections are November 7th. Mail-in ballots are out. Please vote.